Good afternoon, and welcome to your Unit 4 A-level session. So this session is going to be focusing on Shakespeare unit and looking predominantly though at Unit 1, at the extract section of the paper. So essentially the first 45 minutes of the paper. So as you will be aware, your A-level paper consists of two different papers. You've got Unit 3 and Unit 4. So my colleague Lucy is going to be going through the Unit 3 part of the papers. So that's the poetry part, and then I will be dealing with the Shakespeare part, okay? So you'll have another session on Unit 4, which will allow you to look more at the essay rather than just at the extract. In order to find these sessions, you need to go to the e-sgol website and go to the Carlam Cymru area. And on the drop-down, you'll find recordings, and then you go across there and you'd go to the A-level recordings in order to access this. So the examination paper that you will be looking at consists of two separate sections. You've got section A, where you're advised to spend around 45 minutes on the extract, and then you've got section B, which would be about an hour and a quarter for the essay. All right, so that's the construction of the paper. So we're focusing today on section A, Shakespeare, and the extract. So what we're going to be looking at is just a little bit of an examiner commentary, how to approach an examination extract and the sort of skills that will be required. So the extract, some of you will be aware, if you are able to produce well-informed, well-organised responses, you're hitting the AO1 part of the criteria. And then your ability to demonstrate evaluative analytical skills, where you're looking at the use of language, imagery, literary devices, there's your AO2. But if you look at the mark scheme there, so the allocation of the marks, so you've got 45 marks that are being allocated in total, 15 of them for AO1 and 30 of those, so double then for AO2, all right? So that indicates when, how marks can be earned, and sort of suggests how to focus your approach, okay? So as I said, section A carries 45 marks, and you'll find the section B carries 75 marks. With regards to the extract, the commentary or the feedback essentially that's come from examiners post-marking in conferences, for example, is that they're concerned about the quality of written expression at this level. So the issue that has been voiced is that a lot of examiners have found that candidates are quite informal, quite chatty, and they lack the academic register that is essentially needed at this level. They're also concerned about candidates who write long one-sentence paragraphs. They kind of lose focus, and that seems to be more and more prominent as time goes on. Like I was saying about this kind of, too chatty, too colloquial, and not academic enough. A lot of the responses to the extract have featured candidates who are simply just copying out large chunks of the extract for textual support instead of actually selecting and being precise and specific with their textual support, okay? So it's these brief quotations that are needed. So it's just making sure that you're using those brief, specific, precise quotations, so that there is that opportunity then for close discussion and close analysis, okay? And there you've got a copy of the mark scheme that applies to the extract, okay? So you can familiarise yourself. If you look at, say, the band 4 part of it, okay, you've got this idea of clearly informed, sound accurate, and then band 3, you've got clearly engages, purposeful, So they're the sort of key words that examiners look for with regards to your intent and your answers as well. So the types of things that we need to be considering, or essentially what you need to focus on when you're approaching the extract task, are things like how do playwrights use setting, how do they use dramatic irony, how they use stagecraft, what makes a play powerful and dramatic, and how a character is being portrayed. So to start with, we need to understand things like what setting is. So setting is a place where the story or the play essentially takes place. It could be real, it could be imagined, and you also get a sense of a time period, as well as certain things like social context, weather, landscape, for example. Many works of literature have, very different settings, and that means moving from like the interior and the exterior of the same house. It could be different countries, different centuries, and it is really vital that you're able to note how kind of plot developments and character development sort of link often to those changes in settings. So types of setting that you should sort of be aware of when it comes to considering your Shakespeare play as a drama rather than just like a text are things like physical location. So geographically, where is it? Landscape wise, what is going on in and around the environment? When does it take place? Are we in the 1500s? Are we 1600s? Is it set earlier to when it was written? And the impact of those choices. What is going on in society? Are we based in a very affluent, wealthy society with regards to setting? Are things changing quite possibly? And also you can look at, this idea of actual real places, okay? So for example, those of you who are studying Hamlet, obviously some of you may be studying the Tempest, you could be studying King Lear, Anthony Cleopatra, okay? So you just need to be mindful of the setting that applies to your text, all right? So in literature, setting refers to various locations where the story's action unfolds, and it can often be as important as the plot and the characters themselves. So Hamlet's primary setting is Elsinore, the castle, okay? But the play is also set at a pivotal moment in history as the medieval and Renaissance periods transition into that modern era, okay? So it's not just about place with regards to location and setting, it's also about what's going on historically that's relevant to our understanding of the play. And that's integral, that's vital for your discussion of your drama. And then we've got the understanding that he's a young man who wants to resume his life in studying with his friends at the University of Wittenberg, Germany. Hamlet's mother, Queen Gertrude, manages to guilt trip Hamlet into remaining at Elsinore for a little bit longer, even though to Hamlet, Elsinore is not a castle. He views it and quotes that to him, Denmark is a prison, and with good reason. At Elsinore, Hamlet has no choice but to remember who he is. He's not merely a prince, but also a subject of King Claudius, a subject from whom loyalty is not only expected, but required, is something that's being demanded. So there's a lot being sort of forced upon Hamlet, is what we're looking at here. Those of you then who are studying Tempest, okay, you'll know that Shakespeare sets the play in a far-off, isolated island. Whether he intended the setting to symbolise the New World is quite arguable, but most definitely we could argue that it resembles it. Like America, it is this wild and quite undeveloped place with quite strange sights, strange sounds, and quite strange creatures. It does have this colonial overseer, Prospero, who exploits the native population, and the savage beastman who we know as Caliban, the sprite or the little sort of a spirit, Ariel, who has got these magical powers, turning them into servants or slaves. Prospero's daughter, Miranda, she knows no other world but her father's island. So in this respect, she's like kind of the real life Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. So there's a lot of kind of links you can make to real life kind of like historical information. But there's also this sense of creation, this imaginary world, quite possibly, that Shakespeare has created. Another aspect that we need to be considering is that of dramatic irony. So we've got this sense of dramatic irony of being a situation that the reader knows something about both present or future circumstances that the character doesn't know. For example, those of you familiar with Shakespeare's Macbeth, when Duncan's murdered body is found, Macbeth behaves as though he's angry with the supposed murderers. But interestingly, it's us as an audience that are very much aware of the fact that he is the one that did in fact kill Duncan himself. So that is what we have, that's what we class essentially then as dramatic irony, okay? It's also one of the most effective items in a dramatist's toolbox, most commonly found in films, often in tragedies, okay? It allows for this creation of suspense and it enhances the emotional appeal of the story. Authors use this device to create quite unusual meanings in speeches of characters, and it also creates tension and allows for the idea of sustaining an audience's interest, okay? Stagecraft is also extremely important. Stagecraft is the technical side of like the theatrical film video production, okay? And is also kind of like ticks the boxes when it comes to things like the set design, what the actors are wearing with regards to costume, makeup, any lighting or sound elements. So really what it is, it's the term that refers to all of these little or different elements that come together and essentially create this, you know, performance in the end. So it's all of these kind of bring it all to life. So, you know, when we're thinking about stagecraft, there's a number of little aspects or smaller aspects that we need to consider, but these two are absolutely vital in us allowing ourselves to prove to an examiner that we understand the text as a play and that we're dealing with the text as a play. So things like costume, because that obviously could denote a particular class with regards to societal class. It could categorize, you know, what time with regards to a time period. And then obviously with regards to lighting, you've got things like trying to bring intensity or focus on a specific choice by the playwright. You've got theatrical properties, so the props that the characters or actors may carry, and also things like sound, which encompasses like the effects audible to the audience during a performance, and it definitely allows for the creation of like mood and atmosphere. A couple of things that are often overlooked, this in particular, this idea of an illusion. So an illusion is a reference to a person, a place, an event, okay, without explicitly stating that they're making that link, okay? Allusions could be things like links to mythology. So it could be a case of like where there's reference to there's reference to kind of Roman mythology, quite possibly Hercules. Once you've got these references, it kind of gives you some sort of a link. So it could be a biblical reference, it could be to do with historical events, legends, myths, the literary works. So maybe something like a piece of work that the authors clearly read and they're alluding to it in their own writing, in their own piece. The biblical references are quite common in literary works, and some playwrights' plots are frequently based, especially Shakespeare, on legends and also historical events and actual real life people, okay? Some plays are have got multiple monologues, they've got long interrupted speeches, they've got use of soliloquy. You need to be able to identify if a soliloquy is being used, if a monologue is being used, if there's use of duologue where you've got that kind of interaction between two specific characters. So you need to be able to pick that out and make a statement about that particular aspect. Okay, for example, with a soliloquy, we're going to talk about it as a theatrical device or a tool or a convention that's used by the playwright. And Shakespeare, as we know, okay, he uses his soliloquies quite liberally, so he uses them quite often. And some of his finest pieces of writing are in this form. For example, you may be familiar with the To Be or Not to Be soliloquy from Hamlet. And the whole purpose of the soliloquy is for that engagement with the audience. So when you're stating, say in your answer, that here Shakespeare uses a soliloquy, that's great that you're able to identify it, but you've also got to go a little bit further. You've got to say, what is the impact of a soliloquy? Why does that playwright choose to use a soliloquy in that first instance? So you'd want to talk about how it allows for the writer to convey a character's most intimate thoughts and feelings. It allows for closer engagement, intimacy between the audience and that individual character. It possibly allows for more or less empathy, depending on their circumstances. It often gives us, we're often privy as an audience to a little bit more intimate detail or a little bit more information regarding a specific character because of a soliloquy and what's being revealed in those soliloquies. So I'm just going to lightly skip through some of the next few slides because they're simply just giving you some terms that you can revise and some things that you can potentially look over. Okay, so things like symbolism, so it can be done through colour, movement, characters, prop, costume. So what you've got then is a list of colours and often kind of what they signify or what they possibly symbolise or suggest in a literary sense. So a lot of you will be familiar with green and it being like this idea of something which is linked to inexperience or youth. You could also say that it's linked to this idea of jealousy, quite possibly envy as well. So just be mindful, have a little flick through those and think about how that maybe links to the text that you're studying as well. Characterization within a play is important because every character has a specific function, and without that function, the character is worthless, essentially, okay? So we've got to kind of consider how character is created as well. So now we're just going to focus a little bit on this idea of reading extracts, okay? So approaching them. So the guidance given by the WJC to centres when it comes to approaching extracts is that you need to kind of split it up into two sort of different sections. Okay, so you've got stage one, which is the reading. So going to be mindful and conscious of your timing, okay? But not just of how much time you've got in the exam, but your own personal reading speeds. Because one person, you know, your friend in the same class as you, could be reading at a different reading speed to you. So the way they deal with and how they get through their extract is going to be quite different to how you get through your extract. So you've got to understand and be quite conscious of your individual personal reading speeds. So that means beforehand, you're having a good look through a number of extracts, some exemplar answers, exemplar papers, so you're familiarising yourself with the kind of length that of the extracts that the WJC include in their examination papers, and that sense of like familiarisation. You need to ensure that you keep your attention firmly focused on the text and not worry about how you're going to eventually be writing, okay? So just concentrate on what you're reading initially, okay? And then it's all about your interpretation. So this is your engagement with and kind of your interpretation of the main characteristics of the extract, such as maybe genre, subgenre, any surface meaning, what tone of voice things are being said in, the way in which characters are presented, or the characterization or creation of character. And then you need to understand them in the light of their whole reading of the text. And then in the second sort of stage or second section, that's where you begin to reflect, and that's where you start making your notes and your annotations as you're having your second read. So your first read essentially is you identifying what's going on in the passage, okay, in your extract, and now you've got to look at the how factor. How has the writer achieved what their reading has revealed to the learner? Okay, so now you've got to think about, you know, how does it link to the question? So as you reflect upon the passage, it'll hopefully then allow you to purposefully annotate in light of the question. So, for example, if the question is asking you on the changing character of Hamlet in the extract, then you need to make sure that you're tracking through and you're looking at the changing character of Hamlet, and your annotations aren't generalized, they are specific to that question focus. And the question focus is really important there, okay? So here we've got, sorry, excuse me. Here we've got an extract from Hamlet, and it's an interaction between Hamlet and his, we'll call them friends, his two friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So here you're analysing how Shakespeare presents Hamlet at this point in the play. So already looking at this particular extract, you may already identify before we read anything how little Guildenstern and Rosencrantz say and how heavily weighted Hamlet's sections are. All right, so that's one thing that you could be possibly considering or thinking about before you even read the text. Okay, so always have a think about what it looks like on the page. So if it is an exchange between 2 or 3 characters, is there a character who is being dominated, or is there a character who is dominating? All right, so maybe be quite mindful and conscious of that. So this is asking you how Shakespeare presents Hamlet at this particular point in the play. And what we can see here is that Hamlet is trying to get some answers from the two apparent friends, but they're quite reluctant to give any detail, okay? So what you've got then is just an example answer, a way of how to approach it. So in this extract, Shakespeare presents Hamlet as an intelligent, hostile prince who is in the peak of his madness. He does this in his probing conversation with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. His madness is exhibited through his use of prose in his soliloquy. Okay, so you get a sense that it's straight to the point, and it's already attempting here to answer the question. Continues then a little bit later on. The use of the verb to colour could implicate that their intelligence pales to his own, as his apt understanding of their mission to spy on him trumps their efforts to even begin such a task. Additionally, Shakespeare presents Hamlet as a rather manipulative man at this stage of the play, as he uses status as a prince to exert his superiority over Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, in addition to using their friendship as a tool to make them comfort. He orders that they are told they tell the truth by the addition of the over presented love. The use of the noun demonstrates how. So look at how this particular extract is picking out picking out individual words and phrases. It's fully answering the demands of the question, looking at things like nouns, pre-modifying adjective. So really analysing the quality and the use of language. So continues, obviously you get a sense of how developed and how thorough this particular response is. And then you've got the next extract that you could have a look at. So this one is a King Lear extract, and it's an exchange here between, you've got Lear, Goneril and Albany, and the question is asking you to look at, analyse the presentation of Lear and Goneril at this particular point in the play. So you're having there to deal with two different characters, okay? So it's not saying about the relationship, it's just a presentation of both Lear and Goneril, okay? So there's a sense that you don't have to compare them, all right? It's not asking you to compare them, it's just asking you to deal with them as they appear. You may use one view to inform your view of another, but it's just making sure you're mindful of the fact that you need to have quite equal discussion of both characters. So we'll have a quick read of a little bit of this. So we firstly see Goneril presented as somewhat respectful and considerate towards her father. She states, "I do beseech you to understand my purposes." The use of enjambment after beseech you suggests Goneril may be pleading with Lear to understand her intentions. It suggests a softer aspect of Goneril's character with focus on my purposes, forcing Lear to see how his actions are affecting someone else. Goneril is swiftly reverted back to a disrespectful daughter. And then you got a little bit later on, she seems to take a role of authority. This particular response does talk about use of violent imagery. Doesn't really talk about the impact that has. It doesn't really allow you to understand more about the character. So there's use of violent imagery, but what does that tell you about that particular character is what we need to be thinking about as well, okay? So with this particular answer, we do feel like it could go a little bit further at times when it comes to the analysis of the character, okay? Just a little bit of revision, trying to make you consider a little bit about your literary terms. So it's really important that you are familiar with literary terms and that you've got the right terminology needed to answer the demands of the question. And if you think back to the grid at the start, the mark scheme that stipulated the AO1 and the AO2, the AO1 is about your academic register. That's what it looks at. That's one of the aspects noted. And then AO2 then is asking you to analyse effectively. But if you're unable to identify the terminology that's being used, then you're going to struggle then in an effort when you're trying to actually make thorough, sound points with regards to your analysis. So you've got things like repetition, contrast. Okay, so the first term that we need to make sure that we're familiar with is that of patterns. So here what we've got is the set of repetition, quite possibly if you see things coming in pairs, motifs, which are these repeated sets of images. It could be images, it could be phrases, it could be descriptions that are used to draw your attention to key messages or key ideas that the playwright, that the dramatist wanted us to consider. And then you've got this idea here of the way in which things are being presented, the plot of the play or the plot of the novel, and where we see that the writer has put things together in a specific fashion, in a certain way, to achieve certain effects, quite possibly. So that's what we would dub or call the handling of time. Where you have the writer using literal or figurative language with some sort of sensory appeal. It could make ideas come to life and makes them a lot more realistic, quite possibly, sometimes through description, but more often than not, it involves more complex techniques such as personification, metaphor, allusion, symbolism, simile. All right, so just being mindful that this use of literal or figurative language it is used quite commonly by the playwrights. The imagery choices, essentially, is what we're looking at. You've also got the selection of words that are used by the playwright, used by the dramatist, that allow us to kind of look at a certain element or a certain angle. It could be frequent use of maybe religious words, or verbs, active verbs of violence, or exclamations of love, quite possibly. So what we're looking at here are the diction choices, or the word choices, or the phrasing or lexis choice that's being made by the playwright purposefully. All right, and this idea of purpose is what we need to be really conscious of. So this sense that the playwright has made conscious choices to gain a specific impact or effect. One thing we have to be really conscious of is making sure that we deal with characters as characters. All right, we have to remember that these figures are fictional devices, and even if they are based on real people, they are not real people. They are creations of the dramatist, of the playwright. So the second term would be the techniques that are used to create these fictional figures. So what we're looking at is here the idea of character and characterization. So the person, so the fictional person, and then how those fictional figures are put together, how they are created by the author. And then you've got the importance or the significance of the beginning and the ending, the way that information is sequenced, so the way it's structured, what is maybe withheld, what is maybe revealed, what and when does a playwright choose to keep something back as well. So it's the way in which the plot is constructed, and it's the control of information. But again, this is something that is done purposefully. It's there to engage, to pique our interest, quite possibly, and to sustain interest throughout the course of the play, to heighten intensity at certain parts. All right. So a few key things I just want you to just be mindful of when it comes to preparing for your external examination. So with the 5 or 6 key points I want you to think about. So firstly, make sure that you remind yourself of the timing, both your own personal reading time and also how much time is being allocated for that given question. So for your Shakespeare paper, the extract is 45 minutes. Okay, so just be mindful, you need to read, you need to annotate. Okay, so second read, annotate, and also write the response in that 45-minute window. It's not 45 minutes for writing, it's a maximum of 45 to spend on that section. Otherwise, you are going to be overrunning with the amount and what's expected for the 75 marks in the essay. So point 1, make sure that you remind yourself of the timing. Number 2, then point 2, make sure that you're conscious of the assessment objectives and the weightings. So you've got AO1 and AO2 here. We went over at the start, 15 marks for AO1, double weighted then for AO2. Make sure that you have read thoroughly through the extract. Remind yourself again of the question and what the question's asking of you, the focus. Annotate then the extract on your second read in light of the question. So the Shakespeare questions always ask you to consider literary and language devices, okay, and imagery. So you need to try and make sure that you are ticking those boxes in your annotation. So if there's use of simile, put it down. If there's use of plosive, put it down. If you notice that there's repeated use of exclamative, think about the tone that's being used there, put it down, okay? So make sure that you are annotating in light of the question and what the question is asking you to achieve or what asking you to find. And then point number 6, then finally, make sure that your annotations show awareness of those devices, of those technique, okay? And when you are, say, writing down plosive choice, put like plosive equals bitter, angry, sardonic, sarcastic, whatever it reveals, whatever it implicates or suggests, make sure your annotations are detailed enough so that it allows you to provide a fluent answer. All right. Finally, the last thing is the coverage of the extract. Make sure that the coverage of the extract allows you to discuss from the start until the end. You should have even coverage and even consideration of the extract. And there should be something in the opening few lines and in the closing few lines, and then obviously maybe five or six things in between. Okay, try and aim for around 7 points to ensure that you have got enough coverage. Okay, so this is obviously the first session that you'll have for your A level for Unit 4, and the next session you'll have will be the discussion of the essay question, so the 75 marker. Okay, thank you very much again for your time, and I will see you next time.